My apologies there, everyone. Technology is not my thing, but we've done it. We're here, and so it's going to work. Either way, we're going to get this going. First and foremost, big appreciation to the presenters today, obviously giving up their time for us to teach us some amazing things about things that they are passionate about. Really interested in the topics that we've got today. A great mix of topics, which is super exciting. So can't thank them enough, and I can't thank you all enough for jumping on board. Obviously, I was really hoping there was no technical difficulties, but this is outside my scope, so apologies that stream didn't link through. I believe it's working now on YouTube, so you're all good to go. Regardless, this will be saved and be accessible later. So today we have some great presenters, and first off we have Dan Howard. So Dan is an MMA strength and conditioning coach working here in Melbourne. He's done a lot of other sports in his 10-year experience that he's had, and he's going to sort of introduce himself a little bit more. And his topic today is looking at cognitive training and practical applications to utilizing that in your training. So I'm really excited to hear this. So without further ado, we'll get started with the first presentation with Dan.
All right.
Share that screen, mate. And
yeah. All right. Is that all good?
Yeah, it's coming along.
Presentation up?
It's coming, yeah.
So easy. All right, I'll assume that's a yes. All good. All right, we're going to talk about
hey, can you go listen on their computers? I can't hear you all of a sudden, mate.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Got you now. Have you guys taken up too much of my internet? Grace, are you guys taking up too much of my internet?
Hear me?
Got you now, you right?
Yeah. Ah, beautiful. All good?
Yeah, I think it's better now. Wait, hang on a second. You are frozen. Are you other presenters? Can you hear me fine? Yeah, you're all good. Okay. Just having
I can hear you now.
Yeah, cool.
The only person's camera I can't see is Dan's, so I assume it's his internet that's having the issue.
Yeah, cool. All right, that's fine. We'll give him a moment there.
Yep.
Dan, have you got us?
I can hear you, but you keep out. There we go.
Yeah, cool. I think you're there now, mate. So.
All right, perfect. Just close everything else. Oh. All right, too easy. I think that's it. I can see you guys moving.
Cool.
Too easy. All right, I'll get started. Training, drills, progressions, and practical scientific perspective. Scientific perspective is more just the drills that you can do. I just want to get someone.
Oh, damn, we're
hasn't done any cognitive training before.
Dan, we
be able to, or program it. No, not good again.
No, well, you dropped out from the start again, mate. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why that didn't.
A sec. I'll try hotspotting instead. Try better connection. Is that better?
Seems to be.
Yeah?
Yep. Yeah.
Sorry about that, mate.
Nah, you're good. Hey, we expected this to happen, so.
It would have been mine as well, wouldn't it? All right, shall I start again?
Yeah, start again. Fire off.
Yeah. All right, guys, cool. All right, hopefully there's no issues now. All right, so we're going to talk about cognitive training, drills, progressions, and the practical application. So it's not as much of a scientific perspective, but it is pretty much the drills that I run on a day-to-day basis with my team, how I instill them and how I progress them to make sure we're seeing some sort of adaptation, all right? So I'm a lead coach in S&C for mixed martial arts. So I run through mixed martial arts, jiu-jitsu, boxing and Muay Thai. So most of my examples are going to be based around that. But I'll try and kind of work them into team sports as well, because that's probably what most people work in here. Just a quick little thing, mainly towards the end, is about the results. So we have minimal periodization for martial arts. Our guys can compete with 2 weeks notice, or they might get a nice 12-week camp. So a lot of the time it's going to vary. Hardly ever do we get a 12-week camp nowadays. Usually we're looking to sort of 4 to 8 weeks. So we've got to kind of keep the periodization flexible and keep the training as flexible as possible. All right, so why do we want to do cognitive training? So there's a lot of improvements we can see from it in day-to-day life, but it's pretty much increased general and sport-specific problem solving. We want to increase the concentration levels and focus when training, and we want to increase the ability to store and recollect short-term information. So we want to improve their working memory. Okay. Now I say most of this is based around training because there is mixed studies stating the easiest one would be with reaction drills, as we've probably all heard about, like the reaction lights. There is mixed studies that say all it does is help you get better at the light. So all it does is help you get better at that reaction for that specific drill. But in my perspective, if we can improve their training and their ability to train better, then we're going to improve their game time and their competition as well. Okay. Why can we do it as well? We also do see, so we've seen a strong correlation between levels of fatigue and their cognitive function as well. Okay, so we use grip strength. We've used in the past isometric mid-thigh pull and vertical jump with the gym wear attached, and we've seen a strong correlation between the fatigue drop-off of their cognitive function through a basic drill that we'll explain later, and their grip strength and their vertical jump peak power. Okay, so it's a really easy one to do at the start of most sessions. First of all, to prime them for their session. Second of all, just to kind of test where they are fatigue wise. If they can't concentrate on a basic drill, then chances are they're not going to be able to concentrate or put in the work as well in their weight session or their skills session where they've really got to focus. All right. Tools of the trade. So we use quite a few different things. You can go very basic and just use verbal and visual commands, or you can go a little bit more advanced. We use a concentration. So we use a concentration grid and sticks, which is just basically numbered grid, 1 to 50 on the grid, 1 to 25 on the sticks. The numbers are jumbled, and they're pretty much most of the time they've just got to find the numbers in order. Okay, so it's a very basic one, and say you're counting from 1 to 50 or 1 to 25. You just got to find the numbers. They should be able to do it pretty easily, but it's a good way to test their function, test their concentration levels and their problem solving skills. All right. Also use colored cones and squares, which we'll get into later on. And we use a tablet as well. So this is more for progressions. I've got a slideshow on my iPad with mixed martial arts. It'll either be a knockout or submission. They'll have that in front of them, and as they're doing a drill, they'll basically have to say whether it's a knockout or a submission that comes up on the screen. Okay, more advanced, then they'll work into what strike is the opponent throwing, what submission are they getting into, something like that. You can also do basic mathematical equations as well. So we download children's mathematic apps. Just like 2 add 2, 3 add 3, basic multiplication as well. Something that they should know, so we can kind of dictate how they're feeling and how their fatigue levels are throughout the session. Okay. We use tennis balls as well to improve peripheral vision, especially coming from a martial arts background. We want strong peripheral vision, so we do train that as much as possible. Not necessarily to limit the knockout, but to reduce the effects of it. If they can see a shot coming, and this is going to go for team sports as well, if they can see the play out the corner of their eye or whatever, they're going to be able to react a lot better. All right. basically just get inventive though. So I started this, we'll see later on, with one of my first ever drills, which is just a basic compass drill, but I'll go over that in a second. All right. So when do we want to do it? We want to look to do it 2 to 3 times a week. So we basically run it in with every strength and conditioning session we do. And I try to get the more advanced guys to do it by themselves when they're doing the most specific training session. So for our guys, it will be a hard sparring session, which they do every Friday night. For team sports, it could be something like, if they're having playing mini games or something like that, or they're playing a practice match or something, get them to do it before that, just to prime them and get them switched on, ready for the session. All right. You want to do 30 to 60 second intervals. This is going to depend on how advanced the athlete is and how advanced the drill is. You can do it during their rest period. So we like to use it during the rest period predominantly, because it's going to give them a set period of time that they've got to be resting. If we get them doing a 30-second drill, cognitive drill in their rest period, and we want them to have, say, 2 minutes rest, or a minute rest, 3 minutes rest, whatever, we know 30 seconds of that is going to be set up in the cognitive drill. They might take 15 to 20 seconds to get over to it, 15 to 20 seconds to get back to the bar, set up for 15 seconds. That's going to be a good 2 minute rest that you've got there. So it's kind of dictating that rest, making sure they're not on the phone, not on social media, anything like that. All right. We also prime them with an easy drill for movement prep. This will just be some sort of agility work with either a visual or audio component that's going to get them thinking straight away. You can use it for active recovery, during active recovery, or during aerobic intervals as well. So for example, if we do aerobic power, say 2-to-1 work-rest ratio, might be working for 2 minutes and then resting for 1 minute. We'll get in that rest. We'll get sort of 30 to 45 seconds of cognitive drills. That might just be, again, mathematical equations or something like that. But it's going to get them thinking, and you're going to see a big improvement in their performance for the next few intervals as well. All right. Now, we like to change the drills on a weekly basis. Basically, the main thing when you're doing cognitive training is just they've got to be thinking. They've got to get thinking. That is your main goal for the session or for that drill. Okay. So if they're doing the same drill day in, day out, or week in, week out, they're going to get used to that. So that's going to reduce the effects of it. All right. The only thing we'll use twice is we'll use their testing. So that's obviously going to be standardized. We'll use the same, for example, number grid. We'll use that every time they test, but that's the only time they'll use it. So we might use it every 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks, depending on when we test them. But that's the only time they'll use that drill and that grid. Other times we'll bring up another grid or something like that, something different, just to keep them thinking the whole time. All right. So testing. So what do we do for testing? Basically, we use the concentration grids. It's the easiest one to use, or the concentration sticks. It tests the ability to complete a basic function that obviously anyone can do. Most of our athletes are going to be able to count to 50, so we should be pretty sweet with that. And it can test their ability to handle distractions as well. Okay. So when they're doing these sessions, depending on how advanced they are, we might put a distraction up, as I said, with the iPad, or might just ask them simple questions. What's their date of birth? What day is it today? What day of the week it is? What month is it? Where are they? What's the address to the location of that? Something like that. Who are they fighting next? Just to get them thinking. It hasn't got to be anything too crazy, just to get them thinking. All right. We also test their pattern recollection. So this will be, they'll be sat at a desk or a bench on the gym floor, whatever. And this will be for their working memory as well. So we might have 3 or 4 cones set up, different colors in front of them. They will be looking away from the cone. I'll say, right, yellow, blue. And then they'll have to turn around, touch yellow, touch blue, and then turn back around. Then we might go yellow, blue, red. And we'll just add a cone each time, or add a color each time. Whatever they can get up to is going to be their score for that time. So if they can get up to 4 a combination of 4, combination of 5, 6, that's going to be their test result. All right. And we do basic puzzle solving. So this can be downloaded on a phone. We use an aptitude test phone application on the phone. Can't remember the name of it at the moment, but I can get back to you. I can put it in the comments section if you want. Just to test their problem solving ability. All these aptitude test ones have levels on them, so it's pretty easy to kind of dictate when they're improving. All right, so a few of the drills that we do. So the first ever one I done was just the moving compass drill. So this tests their working memory and their problem solving skills. Obviously everyone knows the hands of a compass: north, east, south and west. All right, I'll always be north when we're doing this drill. And if I say north, they've got to step towards me. If I say south, they've got to step away from me. East, move east, west, move west, so on and so forth. All right. To progress this and to make it more advanced, I can always be north still, but we can do like, all right, if I say north, they're going to move south. If I say east, they're going to move west, so on and so forth. Or I can be moving as well. So this is where the dynamic part comes in, the moving compass. If I'm north and I'm always moving, I'm always walking around, the hands of the compass change as I walk around. Okay, so it's going to get quite a bit more advanced. It means they always need to think about where they're moving, where they're working, and what I'm saying as well. Okay, you can also add this in with visual commands as well, and I can point one way but say the other, point one way, say the other, point one way, say that way, whatever. All right. As I've gone over before, we use the numbered grid. It's really easy. It's good for sustained concentration levels as well. So you're going to see when they get to sort of, number 15, maybe number 20, that they do start to zone out. So we need to keep them focused the whole time. In a game, for fights, we need to keep them focused for 3 to 5 minutes. In a game, it's going to be a lot longer. So you need to make sure they can keep their focus for that time. All right. Tennis ball drills. So these can be partnered, solo, or we can just do like unexpected throws with the coach. Got some videos of that in a second. Mathematical equations. Keep it really simple. Keep it nice and easy. Things that they will know. Okay. We obviously don't want to embarrass anyone with their mathematical knowledge as well. So keep it simple. 2 add 2, 3 add 3, 4 add 4. Basic multiplication is going to be good enough. It's going to get them thinking. All right. Cone drills, as I said, working memory, problem solving. So you want to build up those combinations as much as possible. And this is where you can get the agility work in there as well. So you can give them a combination, say red cone, blue cone, yellow cone. You can mix that up every rep that they do. And we can work their agility in this as well. So we can say a different combination as they're working on that combination, or we can point to a different cone that they've got to go to. Okay. So sport-specific slideshows, as I said, we use submissions or knockouts, but you can do this for anything. You can do this for plays in a game, pretty much anything you want to make it really sport-specific and just add that distraction, okay? Examples of drills. This is a little video I've put together. So as you can see, he's got the grid in front of him. Okay, that's numbered 1 to 50. On the floor, he's got colors as well. So the numbers are going to be different colors. As he sees the numbers, say 1 is red, he's going to step out to the red. Okay, if 2 is yellow, he's going to step out to the yellow. All right, and just go from there. All right, so this is working memory. He's got to remember what the grid is on the floor. He can't look at it, and concentration level of the grid as well. Okay, now he's using peripheral vision, looking in front of him and touching the colors on the fit lights. Now we add a distraction. And he's got to basically say whatever is in the blue box because he's got a blue light. All right. This is problem solving. So on this one, he's got to hold the stick in the right hand, in the left hand. He's got to move a magnet in the right hand from number 1 to number 25. So 1 in the yellow, then he'll go to 2 in the red, 3 in the yellow. He can't get the stick tangled up because it'll mess him up. And as you can see, it's the high level athlete. He fights on Bellator. And now we add a distraction and some sort of other cognitive function, visual function. He's got to watch where the coach moves as he's doing that same drill. All right. So there's a lot going on. Yeah, basically, obviously, he's more advanced. So we are doing advanced exercises with him, but it can get quite hard. Okay. And then we've got the next one, which is just basic tennis ball throws or ball throws. Okay. Throws with the left, catches with the right. Throws with the right, catches with the left. Okay. And from here, I can add a distraction. We can put an iPad in front of her. Or I can just say, only throw the blue ball, only throw the yellow ball. Or I can say, right, throw the opposite ball to what I say, just to get her thinking as much as possible. I can ask her equations or whatever as well as we go. All right, so results of this, I'm sorry if I've spoken really fast, guys. Hopefully it's all, you can understand it all. But results of this, basically, I've put this in here just to kind of show the sort of time frame where you can see exactly what you want to improve. So you gotta think as well. It is all hand in hand. So if you're 4-week camp, you can increase their concentration levels, which means we're going to be able to add more distractions. Okay. Obviously, as you increase their concentration levels, they're obviously going to increase their problem-solving ability and their ability to recall information. Okay, so this all flows hand in hand. 4-week mark, you're going to see a lot more distractions. So we went from 0 distractions to about 6 distractions in 4 weeks. 6-week camp, we saw a big improvement in their aptitude testing, and a 12-week camp, we saw a big improvement in their information recall. Okay, yeah, it all flows hand in hand. If you've got bigger concentration levels, you're going to have better recall information and problem solving ability. So if you improve one, you're going to improve the other. Main thing is when you add in distractions or when you are progressing them, their score shouldn't decrease. Okay, so say in 60 seconds, if I can get from 1 to 50 on the grid, and then I add one distraction and suddenly I'm going 1 to 20 in the same time, obviously I can't handle that distraction and perform to the best of my ability. So you have to pull it back a little bit. Okay, so I would pull it back until they can sort of see no more than a 10% decrement in performance. As soon as they get on performance, and then we'd add another distraction. All right. Hopefully that all makes sense, guys. I know it was a little bit rushed, a little bit fast. We had some issues at the start, but yeah, if you've got any questions, just let me know.
Yeah, that's awesome, mate. I think that's a really interesting topic to open up with, because a lot of the stuff that we look at for strength and conditioning and performance-based training is to do with improving athleticism, and a lot of people forget, the control center of all movement and all abilities realistically is the nervous system, which comes from the brain. So do you have any examples where over those training phases, like athletes or coaches reported an increased capacity to execute skills, or skill decision making was improved as well in the actual fight training, or is it still something you're looking to see next?
Yeah, scientific study-wise, I am looking to do a paper on it, but I haven't had the time yet. Obviously, with COVID and that sort of stuff, it's been a bit all over the place. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, because obviously, our guys are training sort of 3 to 4 hours a night in their skill, so it's hard to really see if the improvement's coming from the cognitive work or from just improving at the skill, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of factors that go into it, what stage of fight camp they're at and all that sort of stuff. So I've got to kind of, I'm still trying to work out a drill that we could do and some testing that we could do for a paper. But yeah, we've definitely, the guys are feeling a lot better. So that's kind of the main thing. First of all, as long as the guys are feeling better and they're feeling better, feeling more switched on,
yep,
then that's what we're looking for. But yeah, I can't definitively say it's definitely helping them, because we are seeing massive improvements in, problem solving, in their coordination and their skills, but that could be coming from the skills training as well.
Yeah, cool. And what about any guys that have suffered a concussion or KO, coming back to this and seeing them deteriorate and then come back through, obviously improving? Have you had any exposure to that yet?
Yes, we have. So no knockouts, thank God, just yet. But hopefully we won't see that. But yeah, so we have seen it with concussions, from TKOs and all that sort of stuff as well. They do get a big decline. So we try to test them the week of the fight and the week after the fight as well, just to kind of see where we're at. So we have seen declines in up to 40% in some of the basic cognitive testing. So that'll be like the concentration grid and the sticks. We've seen a decline in up to 40% after concussion. So it's pretty huge.
Yeah, right. And probably coming from a sport where concentration and focus and being in the zone is super important, because your life's on the line. I could understand how how your athletes feeling more confident in their cognitive ability would be really important for them.
Yeah, that's it. And as I said, we're doing a lot of stuff with peripheral vision as well at the moment. So the study of the zone, it's not necessarily going to stop them from getting hit. They're just going to be able to prepare more for it. So if you can see something coming quicker and slightly react, you might still get hit, you might still get clipped, but if you can react a little bit better, it's going to reduce the chances of concussion. And then obviously, as I said, it's got a big detriment to cognitive function.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. I think the main place where we've seen it in the past has been a lot of F1 drivers. You've sort of seen a lot of reaction-based training stuff, and I sort of see it as something that definitely could be utilized a lot greater. So it's awesome to see. Is there anywhere where people can find you, follow you, touch base?
Yeah,
obviously.
So most of the stuff is just Coach Dan Howard. On Instagram, it's Coach Dan Howard or at Coach Dan Howard. You can find me there. I've got some videos of my cognitive training up there. I haven't been as active over the last sort of 6 months because of everything that's happening. But yeah, I've got a lot of stuff on YouTube as well, which is Coach Dan Howard as well. But most of my cognitive stuff is just short videos, so it'll be on Instagram. Yeah.
Amazing, mate. I really appreciate your time today, and thanks so much for that. Awesome.
Good. Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, and we will move on to our second guest here today. So we have Attila. Attila has an extensive background in sprinting. He's also a exercise and sports physiotherapist, and he's been doing a lot of coaching professional athletes as well along his journey. And he's going to speak to us today on a really interesting topic: fast physiology, understanding and applying training adaptations for running fast. And right now, this is probably the hottest topic and hottest sort of like training trend that we're seeing in our industry. So yeah, really looking forward to learning more about this. Attila, if you want to unmute and then go for the screen share, we'll get you cranking.
Beautiful. Give me 2 seconds. And beautiful. I think everyone should have that now, which is good. So thank the introduction, Mike. And as stated, so my topic will be talking about physiology, particularly in relation to running fast, with the idea being that hopefully everyone who's listening can get a bit of a better appreciation and understanding for the actual physiological changes that happen when we train our athletes. And using that, we can create some better, more specific training protocols for our athletes. So in the simplest possible terms, the recipe for running faster essentially has 3 main ingredients. One needs to generate a high amount of force in a really short amount of time and in the right direction. If an athlete is quickly. So if we split them up, basically, we can understand that the first 2 are largely due to physiological changes, whereas the third factor is largely biomechanical. I actually had this topic prepared initially to cover both of these, but time restrictions and things, we're just going to be covering the physiological factors at play today. So when we're looking at physiological factors, there's 4 inseparable components that we're going to be talking about today that are important for our athletes to be able to run fast. The first of these factors is physiological cross-sectional area. Definitionally, physiological cross-sectional area is a little bit different to anatomical cross-sectional area in the sense that physiological cross-sectional area is always measured perpendicular to muscle fiber orientation. So for unipennate and bipennate muscle structures, you end up with quite different results as opposed to just measuring straight across the muscle. In real-world contexts, we know that typically bigger muscles are capable of moving heavier loads and generating more force. This is the knowledge that underpins the need for weight classes in sports like powerlifting or boxing. Perhaps more relevant to us is the fact that PCSA is highly modifiable, especially in untrained populations, with even just a 6-week protocol of twice a week strength training being shown to significantly increase muscle size. The protocol used in this study, for instance, was only using a simple leg extension machine, 2 to 4 sets of like 8 to 12 repetitions. So even to get some significant changes, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. If we take this one step further, one thing that's been doing the rounds a bit more recently, especially with sporting populations, is eccentric exercise, is specifically looking at the Nordic hamstring exercise. In this particular study, we can say from a physiological cross-sectional area perspective, we can see that the Nordic hamstring exercise is pretty effective at significantly improving hamstring muscle PCSA. Protocols used in this study was 6 weeks again, started with a single session of 2 sets of 5, and then at the end they progressed to 3 sets, the first one 12, second 10, and the third set 8 reps. So even then, not really high volumes, but we can get some big changes to muscle size. I think that given the established and emerging literature of the efficacy on eccentric training and injury reduction, acknowledging that such exercises can give us bigger muscles is also pretty important. Going into this particular study, just a little bit deeper, I think it's also interesting to note that the authors of the study split the results into responders and non-responders for this in their post-analysis. This was done because positive outcomes rather were more common, but they weren't exactly uniform. And in fact, some participants seemed to show negative adaptations to the Nordic protocol. And so for us now, actually looking at this, we can see a clear gain in the physiological cross-sectional area for people who responded positively and had injury reductions, whereas non-responders actually showed a decrease in their physiological cross-sectional area. This actually gels pretty well with other data that seems to suggest that some athletes just don't really benefit from eccentrics, but the paper doesn't really attempt to summarise why. I suppose for us, if we're just looking at logical reasons why this might be the case, there could be issues with technique of the exercise, there could be altered adherence to the program, there could be poor genetic factors at play, or perhaps some athletes are just a little bit soft. But if we're looking for good takeaways, an athlete that responds to Nordics, in turn, should have some bigger hamstrings, whereas if they don't get bigger hamstrings, they might not be responding and they might actually be adapting negatively to the protocol. So now that we've established that PCSA is indeed modifiable, it seems pretty relevant to connect it back to improving our running speed. More data and definitely real-world experience would suggest that muscle thickness, strength and power are all related. A simple study like this one from 2012 showed that a strength program definitely increases one person's 1 rep max on a deep squat, and that in itself also results in increased plyometric ability, even though plyometrics were not specifically trained for in this particular study. And both of those things also result in increased muscle thickness. And thus, we've got a pretty clear link between size, strength and power. All these three factors seem to be at play together. So if we're looking to get our athletes to produce high forces, it seems pretty necessary that we're going to be working on these three things. But at the same time, further real-world experience should also tell us that this isn't the whole picture. If it was that simple, the man on the right there, Mr. Olympia, would be the fastest man in the world, and he most assuredly is not. As it was termed by Jones et al. 2008, while it is commonly recognised that the larger muscle cross-sectional area has greater force generation capacity, the large variations in functional cross-sectional area suggest that other variables account for differences in strength rather than just size alone. So unfortunately for sprinters like Harry and Trey, size does matter, but it is not everything. From at least one standpoint, that arises due to the nature of traditional hypertrophy. Sarcomeres are added in parallel, so added next to each other, rather than in series, that is on top of each other. In turn, that would mean that traditional hypertrophy adds additional contractile units to contract with a higher force, but there is not an increase in contraction velocity. Coming back to our points from earlier, that means we can contract with more force, but not necessarily in minimal time. In order to contract faster, we need to build up sarcomeres in series, as then we can have multiple contractile elements contracting simultaneously, which will then result in a faster muscle contraction, which then logically brings us to our next physiological factor, muscle fascicle length. In the simplest possible terms, muscle fascicles are groups of muscle fibers, and they contain contractile elements for our muscles, which, as I'm sure we all remember from undergrad, are our sarcomeres. I think this is most easily visualized with the analogy of a feather. The stalk of the feather on the left is not dissimilar to the central tendon, labeled CT in the diagram on the right of that soleus muscle. We can see the fluffy part of the feather, the barbs that come off the stalk, are not too dissimilar from the muscle fascicles that come off the soleus muscle on the right, so the red stuff that's coming off the middle. I think those two things actually explain it quite well. It should be noted that increasing fascicle length is not the same as increasing sarcomere length. I've seen that confused a bit when people talk about it online. If we just increase the length of actual sarcomeres, we would quickly find that from a mechanical perspective, they would start to fail. So instead, we actually build more sarcomeres in line with each other. It should be also noted that muscle fascicle length is somewhat dependent on muscle type. Muscles usually have either more short fascicles or fewer longer fascicles, and that's a large determinant on how powerful a muscle can actually become as you start to train it. First most obvious point to get out of the way is something that we've known for quite a long time, is that muscle fascicle length is somewhat modifiable. We first noted this adaptation by immobilizing muscles in a lengthened position, and found that sarcomeres in series were added when we did this, even though there was no exercise training being done. Later on, studies into decline running found that running downhill seemed to increase sarcomeres in series also. So this study here in particular was a rat study, which enforces what we've been saying, that running uphill seems to increase sarcomeres in parallel, so getting bigger muscles, sarcomeres stacking next to each other, rather than sarcomeres in series, which seems to happen when we actually do the decline running, if we look at the graph there. The assumption from this was that eccentric loading associated with the decline running was probably responsible. And more recently, that we've had some thorough data come through that confirms this to be the case. We can see that there's a distinct increase in fascicle length with eccentric training, which at least partly explains some of the eccentric fad we're going through at the moment. Probably worth noting here as just a small tangent is that those people who normally are against eccentric training will typically cite that it makes their athletes too sore. And there does appear to be some merit with this argument. After performing eccentric exercises, overstretched sarcomeres become disrupted sarcomeres and maintain a prolonged state of contraction. So you'll have relaxed and contracted sarcomeres next to each other, which is not too dissimilar to what you get when you have a cramp. So in that sense, you've got muscles that are unable to relax fully, and so the athlete will normally complain they feel a bit tight. Later on, as that disrupted fibre then dies, you actually get proper muscle soreness, which tends to linger on a bit longer. And so, a natural response to such trauma is for muscles to adapt and to get longer, to better tolerate force in their stretch positions. So the body's response to this is to essentially build sarcomeres in series, which is then able to better handle the loads placed upon them, such that sort of muscle trauma and that those disrupted sarcomeres don't go through that again. This also explains why people pretty quickly get used to performing eccentrics rather than just being sore every time they do them. And so for us, looking to get our athletes to run faster, the data is pretty well established on this topic and crystal clear. Longer fascicles result in shorter contraction times and faster muscle shortening velocity. Putting this into practice, we know that long fascicles mean faster athletes. Studies such as this one, which is looking at the vastus lateralis, the gastroc medial, and the gastroc lateral of sprinters, show that there's a clear trend between shorter fascicles and slower running times in these muscles. Other studies like this one show that sprinters consistently have longer fascicles than distance runners or control groups. But perhaps even more interestingly, the distance runners in these studies have shorter fascicles than even the control group did. So for us here, training specificity is incredibly key because negative adaptations are also a thing that can affect our athletes. Moving to our third physiological factor, this one throws a little bit of a spanner in the works, just like Anthony Wiggle often does, the pronation angle. So the pronation angle is defined as the angle of that the muscle fiber comes off the central tendon. As we can see in this image here, I don't know if my pointer actually comes on the shared screen or not, but if you're looking at the pronation angle there, you can see there's a central tendon and we're looking at the angle the muscle fibers come off. So muscle fibers, say if it came off at a right angle, would be considered an incredibly high pronation angle, whereas if we came off at about the 30-degree angle or so, that's considered that we can see in that image, it's obviously quite a low pronation angle. And so when we're talking about pronation angle, that's essentially what we're talking about. First thing worth noticing is that when we talk about pronation angles, is that there's both short-term changes and then there's also long-term changes. Studies like this one have observed changes of pronation angle even within the same weight session. And I mean, if you actually stop and think about this for a second, it actually does make perfect sense. The first thing that happens when one starts a weight session, increase in blood flow, muscles swell up a bit, we get a pump, and then those muscle fibers now push against each other and force other fibers to go wider. If we think about our feather demonstration again, you can see the feather on the left. The small barbs are able to orientate in quite acute angles because of their size. Whereas if you look at the larger feather, which would represent a larger muscle, the bigger fibers actually fight for space off that stalk, and by doing so, they orientate at largely flat angles. So we see this correlation in the literature also in, say, this study, for instance, muscles that are physically larger. So we're looking at arm muscle size in this. Those muscles consistently show larger pronation angles. Similar results can be seen in studies like this one, comparing men who trained lower body for long periods of time compared to control groups. The light bars here show a consistent decreased pronation angle in men who skip leg day. And also, even just looking at the most basic level, hypertrophy-based protocol increases pronation angle and muscle size almost at exactly the same rate. If you're comparing those two graphs, there's very few differences between the two. Back to eccentrics again, because it's that topic everyone likes to talk about. We can see 6-week Nordic hamstring protocol significantly increases pronation angle also. Sprinting and playing soccer in this study, they did increase the pronation angle a little bit, but it wasn't actually considered clinically significant. Which brings us back to an important point, is does actually increasing pronation angle make our athletes faster? If we look at studies like this one, comparing sub 11, it's the S11, or sub 10, S10, 100 meter times for athletes, we found that consistently the S10 athletes had decreased pronation angle when compared to the S11 runners, which might not be what you'd expect to find. And similarly, studies like this one found that regardless of which training method was actually used, improvements in sprint times across the study were also shown to be associated with decreases in pronation angle. Which brings us to an interesting conundrum, really, because even if we look at it something like this, where we can see if we actually get muscle fibers and model them and see exactly what happens when we contract, we can see that if we decrease pronation angles, we expect to find faster muscle shortening. So even on a physiological level, decreased pronation angles seem to help us. So when we're working with our athletes, which button do we want to press? Do we want to increase or decrease pronation angle? And unfortunately, the literature here isn't quite clear. Perhaps because changing pronation angle isn't something that you can do in isolation. When you change your pronation angle, you also change a bunch of other things. But up to this point, the literature hasn't sufficiently been able to isolate the effects of changing pronation while keeping all other factors constant. So it's something we actually need to study a little bit more. If we step away from the literature just a little bit and use some applied theory, it might be understandable by doing all of these things, like that help us run fast, like strength training, for instance. We increase our pronation angles, and that's obviously a positive thing. But in the actual act of running faster, we seem to decrease it. But at the same time, given the depth of the positive changes that come from activities that increase these angles, it might be best to continue those activities with our athletes and also just couple it with some continued sprint work, which will then in turn decrease the pronation angle just a little bit. At least that makes the most sense to me. And so with that one cleared up, we come to our final factor, which is muscle fiber type. Something I'm sure we're all familiar with, even from our undergrad days, is that type 1 muscle fibers are our slow twitch fibers. Type 2A fibers are fast twitch. 2B or 2X, depending on which literature you read, are even faster twitch fibers. And then other fibers are hybrid or mixed fiber types as well, which will display different characteristics depending on exactly what type of training is being performed. From a training perspective, these fibers are all stimulated at the same time initially, but they'll come on or off depending on exactly the duration of activities performed here. Obviously, at the start of an activity, they're all going, but then the fast twitch fibers will fatigue quickly. So if the activity is actually sustained beyond any real length of time, then you're going to be doing slow twitch fibers predominantly for your activity. So that's actually pretty helpful if we're looking to simulate different fibers. Should also be noticed that increases or decreases in the number of these fibers can happen pretty quickly. 6-week program of endurance training can produce a significant increase in the amount of type 1 fibers. But perhaps more interestingly, and something some people might not expect, is that same 6-week program, if we do sprints instead, we actually increase more of the type 2A fibers than the type 2B or 2X. I know some people would associate sprinting with all sort of 2X type stuff, but realistically, if you stop and think about it, very few sprints go for a second or two. Even the fastest man in the world running 100 meters, it's still 9 seconds. So you're going to be using a lot of 2A as you do that activity as well. I think that also makes sense from a force production standpoint. We know that the force production capabilities of different muscle fibers vary pretty greatly. Studies like this one comparing a control group of non-lifters to bodybuilders, which are represented by the clear and shaded bars there respectively. We see that biopsied fast twitch fibers consistently display a higher power output compared to the slower twitch fibers. Something actually that's pretty interesting that came out of this study as well, which was at least if you compare the power to the cross-sectional area on the graph on the right there, so we see that comparing cross-sectional area of fibers to total power output, the type 1 fibers in the bodybuilders are responsible for less of the force than their cross-sectional area would allude to, whereas the type 2 fibers are actually responsible for more of the force in the activity than their cross-sectional area would allude to. It's actually something interesting and something probably not necessarily that would be expected. When looking at different types of athletes, we see this also well represented as well, looking at the percentage of muscle fiber types between strength and power athletes. Strength athletes consistently display more of type 1 fiber type percentage, whereas our power athletes seem to dominate more in type 2 fiber percentage. Should be noted, however, that strength athletes typically have larger cross-sectional areas across the board, so they'll have more numbers of these fibers regardless. And something that really probably doesn't need to be said, because we've known it even since, according to this study, since the 1970s, is that sprinters do consistently have a lower percentage of slow fibers, when compared to long distance or middle distance runners. So if we're looking to have one of our athletes run fast, obviously training for these characteristics are pretty desirable. Perhaps one little bit of the literature, which I did find pretty interesting, is that if we look at the differences between men and women when they're doing these sorts of training, data such as this one would imply that when exposed to traditional strength training methods, women will often respond with a type 1 fiber type bias, whereas men will typically respond with more of a type 2A type fiber type bias, which is actually a little bit different between the two sexes, even when they're doing the exact same type of training rather. This reinforces a pretty common assertion. Realistically, men and women who compete in the same sport may have to train a little bit differently in the gym. If we're looking at running fast in particular, the implication would be that men will probably get a bit more out of traditional strength training than women will. And so if women want those same fiber types in their arsenal, they'll need to actually have a bit more of a power focus throughout their season. And finally, just to round off the discussion regarding eccentrics, because we've obviously brought them up a few times, eccentrics appear to somewhat promote our type 2 fibers, but it's not really to a significant degree. So from a fiber type perspective, they don't make a whole lot of difference, which is more or less it for me. That's our 4 physiological factors covered in probably a little bit too much detail.
No, great.
So I'll just quickly summarize it if you'd like. It's probably easier that way.
Go for it.
Yeah, easy. So just to make it super clear, big physiological cross-sectional areas are good. We like long muscle fascicles. We think we like small pronation angles, but we're not super sure about that one. And we obviously like our type 2 muscle fibers. So yeah, that's pretty much most of the discussion. If we think about all of these factors, and if we include all of that in our programming, our athletes really should be able to produce a high amount of force in a really short amount of time. Which is most of what I wanted to say. I understand I've gone overboard, so no. I don't know if we have time for questions or not. But
yeah, absolutely. We'll get into a couple just because I've got a couple here. First one is, so obviously I'm always interested in training studies and what they do and don't do. And the question is commonly like, do you get to observe any of the actual training? So you see how they're executing the lifts and so forth from some of these studies? Because I'm always curious as to who's coaching it and what they're coaching. If you're talking about long fascicle lengths, different pronation angles, and trying to improve this stuff, is there a way that they're doing these exercises that is promoting benefit to it? Because you could, obviously everyone has different range of motion abilities, but is there sort of like a gold standard that we're looking to achieve here?
Yeah, well, at least if you're looking from a study perspective, it is hard to monitor exactly what's going on. Studies will often include, say, pictures that they've used. So we want the athlete in this position or that position. They'll usually include what cues are being used in the specific studies. So there definitely isn't an established gold standard of athletes should be in this position or that position. If anything, they try and make the studies as reproducible as possible, I suppose. So they're kind of a bit generic a lot of the time in their approaches, such that, it's good in the sense that anyone could sort of read a study and try and apply it, but it is bad in the sense that it's not specifically reproducible to our athletes. So you kind of get a bit of it, but you don't get exactly what's going on. I think if you were talking specifically about, say, something like fascicle length, where those studies have been reproduced so many times, and it's definitely those training effects we can definitely see in our athletes. They do these exercises, they do these eccentrics. Definitely from a physio perspective, we see that athletes who do that tend to get injured a bit less, especially if they seem to respond. But from a coaching perspective, we see that these athletes are stronger as well, and their rate of force development is higher. And if we can consistently do that, then we're going to have stronger runners.
Yeah, my follow-up.
So I think it's I was just going to say. So I think it's about trying to make to just get the exercises done, and then you generally see the positive changes in your athlete.
Absolutely. And my follow-up to that is because a lot of times you talk about people who are coming into these studies and sticking to it in that 6 to 12 week period are naturally going to get better at those technical lifts. So their proficiency is going to improve. So what they're then able to do, how they're able to do it, how the technique, the depth, the range, it all changes as well. It's always interesting to see if they note if there's any changes in the angles of the joints throughout the training phases that they're doing, or if that's something that they're not taking into consideration. They're more focused just on the actual physiological changes.
Yeah, well, I think you'd have to look at a study by study basis in that regard. But I think if we're just saying what happens generally speaking is whatever position or positions the athlete starts that exercise in week 1, they're going to be trying to keep those the same through to week 6. If you're doing that, you're minimizing your variables. And so if your data could get skewed by those variables, you're trying to minimizing that chance. So it's research has to sort of work like that, because otherwise there's too many things that could go wrong and make your results a bit differently. But at the same time, it's also a little bit less of how we deal with things in the real world, unfortunately.
Yes.
That's just the reality of the industry.
No, that's cool. I love it. And then just the final one in terms of training applications. So now we're sort of seeing the big shift on people that will just do lower body training, and their sessions realistically going to be strength and power based only. So there's no hypertrophy based variables within those sessions. Training the lower body, especially if you're trying to transfer speed to team sport athletes, court sport athletes, and then they'll fit in extra resilience based training on other sessions so that it doesn't interfere with the adaptation. Is that something that you're seeing correlate from the research? Because commonly they'll just do 1 or 2 movements in those strength training blocks to elicit those responses, not a full sort of program that has everything in it.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of points to note there. I think if we're looking at the use of hypertrophy, even in these sorts of environments, you can take away physiological cross-sectional area, as we talked about before, but even just putting that in the context of improving your muscle fascicle length, for instance, if we've got more sarcomeres in parallel and then we can stack sarcomeres in series on top of that, we can actually get even more long fascicles, which will then help us run really fast if you put it in that sense.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of merit to, say, doing a hypertrophy block earlier on in your periodized program, even if it's I don't know, if we're talking super long-term stuff, which sprinting often works in 3 or 4 year blocks, especially if you're working with Olympians or something like that. You want your athletes to get nice and big and strong, and then you want to get those fascicles nice and long after that. I think that makes perfect sense from a physiological perspective, but I also think that's something that probably coaches have been doing since I don't know, 20, 30 years, even without realizing that that's the actual changes they were inducing, but they were seeing the positive effects in their athletes.
Amazing.
I think on top of that as well, if we're talking about, say, exercise choice, because you mentioned about choosing a couple of exercises as opposed to doing a whole bunch, I think if you think about it in terms of what physiological adaptations you're actually trying to get with your athletes, you don't need to do 100 exercises in the gym, because realistically, let's say if we want to get long fascicles, well, okay, eccentrics are shown to be really, really good for that. So we don't need to do a whole bunch of other things to try and get that same adaptation. At the same time, if you want to get hypertrophy, okay, well, cool, we know a bunch of other exercises where there's low stability requirements and you can just put on a bunch of loads, say like a leg press or something. If we're talking about quads, well, you can get really big muscles for that. So I think where coaches are sort of minimizing or cutting the fat a little bit, getting rid of the exercises that sort of help but aren't the best, and we can just choose a couple of exercises that really get the changes that we want, and do a bunch of that instead.
Awesome. Great. Love it. Thank you very much for that. Really, really good to get a deeper understanding of the physiology behind getting fast. Great presentation.
Beautiful. No worries, mate.
Awesome. And now we change gears and we're going to move on to Sonia DeRose. Sonia is pushing for female advocates into our industry really strongly, and she's been in the game for a long time now, and she's had some great experience at the AFLW and women's NRL level, and she's really excited to sort of push the level and the number of females that sort of take up the elite roles in our industry. And it's always great to get a different perspective in a male-dominated industry. So lovely to have Sonia on today, who's going to talk to us about improving buy-in compliance and working with athletes remotely, which is obviously something right now that we're all trying to do, and some of us may be struggling to find strategies around it. So communication and learning about these things is always important concept to sort of take into consideration. So thank you, Sonia, and take us away.
Thanks for that. I feel 10% smarter having been in the same presentation as Dan and Attila, so this is really awesome, Michael. Thanks for organising it. I'm just going to take you through probably some of the more softer skills associated with coaching and some of the experiences that I've had working with team sport athletes, mostly in pathway, but also in the elite women's space. What I've found is my contact time and the available hours to train these people is very somewhat limited. Coaches generally want to spend most of the time on their field skill development, which is understandable, which means that in the strength and conditioning side of their training, we often have to do it remotely. And given COVID last year, that became even more remote again. I did have the pleasure of working with the Victorian NAB League female squad, which is the metro and the country squads. There's about 600 female athletes in that. And last year we had to provide programs for them that were specific to their sport, but also kind of met their individual needs. And some of the things that I found I had to address going into that was I didn't know these people individually. Some of them I'd never met face to face. And I had to, I guess, harness their buy-in and see what we could get from them as far as training went. And not everybody had access to a gym, not everybody had access to even proper training resources. So some of them, were out in country Victoria, which meant that they couldn't even get to a football oval. It was, a 2.5 hour drive away. So we sort of navigated that in a variety of ways. But one of the first things that I had to do was listen. So a friend of mine has a communication book, and he's always used this phrase, tune in before you broadcast. And obviously I couldn't listen to 600 girls, but I could certainly listen to the girls that were struggling with actually coming on board and learning and understanding and adopting the program. And so I had to understand what their needs were and try to meet them with their needs and with the needs of trying to produce them into athletes, I guess. Quite a few of them did get drafted last year, so we did do a pretty good job with them, even though most of it was remote. Understanding what motivates them. As coaches, we assume that they want to be faster, stronger, all the rest of it. For a great deal of the people that I've worked with, they actually just want to play footy. regardless of which code it is. They actually just want to go out with their teammates, have a really good run, take a few marks, have a few kicks, have a few touches, and get back in there and feel proud of their achievements. When you make it about injury prevention and strength and speed, I was only capturing probably about 50% of their attention by doing that. I found that I had to actually find out all the other things that were making them tick. So that care about what they wanted from their football actually had to start with asking questions and where did they want to be and what did they see, their year looking like. Having done that, regardless of what they said, and I did take on what they said, but regardless of what they said, they actually understood that I was invested or I was interested in them. And that also gave me a foothold pretty much from the get-go. The other thing is education doesn't always have to be driven by the coach. With a lot of these girls, they're watching football, and I say girls, but any pathway athlete who hasn't had a lot of exposure at the elite level, they're watching their peers, they're watching other people, and they can work off the success of other people. So if you know that there's somebody that's done something exceptional over the weekend, you can get a video clip from that, or that somebody's put out a podcast and they're talking about something that you want to actually sell to your athletes. These are also tools that can be taken to the gym. They can actually be shared amongst your athletes. Most of these people that I'm working with, they're very tech savvy, so they can harness these things pretty quickly, and you can share them quite easily. As a coach, it meant that I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel because I'm showing them their peers who are already doing these things. It meant that then when they did go to the gym, they did want to do max effort box jumps, or if they did go to the field, they did want to do repeat effort sprints. And I say want to in that general sense, but they understood that there was going to be a reward for it because they were going to be like one of their heroes or one of their peers. That success from their peers is something that's actually easy to sell to your athlete. And I think that that's an important thing to understand as a coach, that it doesn't always have to be your voice that they're listening to. They also don't always connect the dots to the activity that you're prescribing to the result that they want to see. We've been in this industry for a long time, and so we understand that if we're going to increase muscle size, it's going to make them run faster. You can tell some athletes that, and they're still not going to buy it. You actually have to just make it relatable to them. So if you've got them in the gym and they're doing the explosive work or the eccentric work or the plyometric work, then you need to be giving them little snippets of results or testing data so they can actually see those increments in improvements. Those sort of things there are one of those really nice tools that we have as strength coaches as well, that sort of backs what we're saying and what we're selling to them. And in my experience, that you don't have to give them a lot of this, but once you've given them 2 or 3 little, well, this is working and this is working, they actually start to buy in on their own. This is what we're talking about here, giving them the tools. You'll get a lot of leverage with your athletes if they like what they're doing, and people like what they're successful at. So if they go from a 20-inch box jump to a 30-inch box jump, they suddenly feel successful at it. So they're going to like box jumps. If they're going to go through, bench throws and they can improve the rate or they can improve the load of their bench throw, they feel successful. They'll buy into it. So you need to be choosing activities that they know that they can conquer, that they can feel accomplished with. We all like to feel accomplished when we leave the gym or when we leave a training session. And so you need to be feeding them at least some of these things along the way so they don't feel that their training is stalled or that they don't feel their training has got a handbrake on it. They want to feel that success. Most athletes are very competitive by nature. They want to feel like they're winning each time they step in the gym. The other thing is variety helps. As a coach, you might know that it's lunges and back squats and bench that's going to make them get all those attributes that they like. But, if you've put them in a 12-week cycle and it's 6 weeks, they're just going through the motions, you've lost your cause with it. You really do need to mix it up for them so that the stimulus is not just a physical stimulus, so mentally they're buying into their training as well. That saying perfect practice makes perfect, well, once people go on to autopilot, it's no longer perfect practice. They actually do need to have that stimulation of doing something that's just a little bit more challenging. That doesn't mean complex. Challenging doesn't have to mean you're going to start to put in, Bosu squats with a barbell. I don't know. I wouldn't do that anyway, but you know what I mean. You want to make sure that it's challenging in that it might be something new that they haven't done before. And it might be kettlebell deadlifts, or it might be, dumbbell bench press. It doesn't always have to be something super complex, but it's just something that keeps them stimulated. Talking of stimulated, if you're finding the repetition of the work boring, then you need to make it interesting for you too. And that might mean that you need to do different assessments on your athletes. You might need to have a look at them and say, okay, here's a gap. I'm actually going to take this component of your training out and I'm going to replace it with this. They'll then get reinterested, and then you'll get reinterested too, because you'll start to see some different potential in that athlete. There's also some add-ons that you can bring into the gym that I think help stimulate athletes. Music, we all like to have either headphones on or music blaring. Make it specific to the group that you're training. I train a group of young NRL boys, and they really, really like thrash metal, half of them, and then the other half of them really like reggae, and it's really hard to make everybody happy. But what we do is I get them to put a playlist together, and everybody else contributes to that playlist. And so then when we've got it on the gym, everybody's waiting to hear their favourite tunes on. And it's a very simple thing to do, but for me, it's been easy because I don't necessarily understand everybody else's music tastes. The music creates atmosphere and also stops people from all that mindless chatter or the need to have to scroll through their phone. They're usually very much engaged with the person that they're next to training, and they're engaged with the music and the coach. Pairing them up with somebody who's similar in strength. Now, I do CrossFit and I really like it, but I also feel that I do better when somebody next to me is just that little bit better than me or working that little bit harder than me. It makes me hungry to chase them. It makes me hungry to try to compete with them, even if it's just a training session. And I would suggest that most athletes feel the same way. They love the sense of competition and camaraderie, but they also like to win. So having somebody paired up with them, or even in groups of 3, that you know that they can train in a nice group, use it to make it stimulating for them. Now, they don't even have to be part of the same team. With one of my girls that was from Wangaratta, she had to train on her own. So I got in contact with somebody I knew that was in S&C in Wang, and I just said, who have you got that's doing just a basic strength program? They gave me a couple of names. I teed her up, and off she went to this new gym, and she started training with them. And she made massive gains in about 6 weeks because she suddenly had training buddies that could work with her, and she felt engaged in the process. This is going back to what we were talking before too, about progress is about giving them feedback and giving them visual charts or giving them numbers or giving them minutes. You know, if they're getting faster, show them their times. If they're getting stronger, show them their loads. Make it really simple and applicable, and make it so you can put it up somewhere in the gym. They love to go up and compare themselves to others, but they love to go up and see if they're making progress too. And that's just a natural thing to see where you're sitting in the hierarchy of the team, but it's also a nice thing to know that you're making those gains in and across your own training program. Again, these are soft skills, and there's no absolutes. Some people will respond to some of these things and some people will respond to others, but you have to try to navigate that if you're working with large groups. You have to try to make it generic, but at the same time specific. It's quite a complex thing to do as a coach, But the more you do it, it's like a muscle, the better you get at it, the more you'll start to see little things that you can add into your own programming that will make your life as a coach better. The other thing that I like to do is introduce other coaches. So if I've got somebody that's available at the time and they want to teach tackling or they want to teach sprint mechanics, I will get an extra coach in to try to do that. The key thing that I've found with that is you're giving them another voice to listen to. Generally, we all like to, I guess, sell the same thing. We're all talking about athletic development. So they're not going to be selling anything that's completely contrary to what I'm doing. And it means that the athletes then understand that it's not just this little narrow funnel of training, like it's so broad. They can get so much more from so many different people. And your own insecurity as a coach usually goes by the time you start to harness other coaches and they start to contribute to your body of knowledge as well. Using specialist coaches, whether it be to write a program or whether it be to deliver an online seminar or whether it be to come out and take a field session, should be part of your repertoire as a coach. It builds the confidence of your athletes and it adds another layer to the complexity of their training. I think that's pretty much it for me today. It's mostly stuff that you guys would have been practicing already, but maybe you've got a couple of insights, maybe you've got one thing that you can take from this and apply it to your own training. But I'm more than happy to do a little bit of a Q&A here, even if it's specific to the team that you're training at the moment or the individual that you're training at the moment. All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. I think it's a really important last post there about not being afraid to reach out to specialist coaches and people that have skill set that you don't have and bringing them into your team or your, into your facility and getting them to expose your athletes to things that they have a specialist skill at. I think that's something that we'll see evolve and something that needs to continue to be pushed forward in the latter parts of the next parts of our industry as well. Just want to touch base on to do with the pathways in the young athletes, because I think it's a really important topic to discuss. In terms of some of the, the building the rapport and age barriers, is it something you send out like quizzes before you get them, or do you send out feedback sheets, or is it just something you do on the floor with the athletes as you're going?
Well, with the NRL girls that I've just recently been coaching, it was very much I got thrown in when they were already in their pre-season.
Oh, you're a bit quiet there, sorry, Sonia.
Okay. I don't know. Sometimes my laptop doesn't like it. Is that better?
Yeah, try.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So with the NRL group that I was just working with, I got thrown in the middle of their pre-season. So I had to do it all on the fly, and it was quite difficult because I was working with an under-19s group and the open age group. And they had completely different needs. We were working with experienced athletes and we're working with novice athletes. Some girls had never even played this sport before. So I found myself sending out a couple of Google Docs, Google Forms, just to get a little bit of feedback from the girls about just some goal setting, some basic goal setting, and really what their experience levels were like. So it meant that when I programmed for the gym, I actually already knew who had gym awareness or had movement understanding, and I knew the girls that were completely novice. And then I could design programs for the novice and I could design programs for the experienced. It also meant the girls that were just in it because they like team sport versus the girls that want to play in the Gillaroos, they also had a slightly different focus as far as their testing went. We put a stronger, push on the different athletic testing for the girls that did want to make the national team. So you've kind of got to do a bit of a fact-finding mission, particularly with youth athletes and with people that are new to sport.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important to be able to separate how you would coach different athletes, because if you've got someone who's striving to be a national level athlete and compete internationally versus someone who's more of a state level and just wants to enjoy their sport for the sport, what you can expect and what sort of expectations you can push upon those athletes. Because if you raise up the athletes' levels who are on the lower end or the lower expectations for their growth, by pushing the people at the top even further, it can obviously help your team's abilities with the competitions that they face. So that's a really interesting way to go about starting your process with them in terms of getting them to fill out pre-questionnaires, so you can discover that out. I love that. Amazing. If you could unshare your screen, Sonia, that would be great. And then
Okay.
I think soft skills and thinking about your pathways and what you're doing as a coach, I think is really critical, and something that a lot of people need to take into consideration. So I really can't emphasize that sort of stuff enough in terms of thinking about your systems and planning and organization and the environment that you're creating and the culture and how that sort of elicits the response that you're getting and adaptations from the training that you're doing, just as much as the culture and environment you've got. So brilliant presentation. Thank you. Awesome. And we'll move on to the next topic today, and we'll be joined by Dale Hansford. Dale's an experienced strength and soft tissue treatment specialist, so he has hands-on treatment skills as well as he's a strength coach. So this would be nice and interesting, getting sort of a left field approach from someone who sort of sees and can feels the body as well as understands what's going on from training it. So Dale's going to talk today on his concepts to do with increasing the effectiveness of your periodized plan. So Dale, if you'd like to take over.
All right, thank you very much. Started. All right, so today we're going to be talking about periodization. So this is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and also one that I find other coaches that I talk to and educate have a lot of trouble with. Being able to design strength conditioning programs for long periods of time, years on end, is a pretty hard task, though it is an expectation for us as coaches that we're able to do that. And consequently, I find a lot of coaches really make a bit of a mess of it, though if you follow some of these points, it can really help. First up, I'd just like to thank Michael for this opportunity, obviously, today, and also for the work that he does for this group. It's a lot of time and effort involved, so big thanks to him, and I suppose a big thanks to everyone else in the community that's rallying around everyone and supporting us, because it is quite a hard time for us at the moment. We're all going through it basically. So as much as we can help support each other, that's a really good thing. All right. So some of the problems that we have now, I'll talk specifically about the strength training part of it here. But the problems that we encounter when we're looking at periodization and then what we need to do is that, number one, what needs to be achieved during the time you have with the athlete. Okay, so you might have the athlete only for the off season before they go back to training with their team. You might have them for the entire year, both out and in season. What do we need to do during that time? That's the very first question that we need to be asking of ourselves. Second point, very few coaches actually truly know how to assess the sport and the requirements of the sports from a strength perspective. And then also how to actually assess the athlete and what their capabilities are currently in respect to what they need to achieve for their sport. And lastly, periodization isn't simply about changing the program for the sake of changing the program. It's about creating positive adaptations that pertain to the sport while also minimizing any negatives. So that's another thing that I see quite often. Coaches, they'll strictly focus on what they're trying to achieve, let's say from a speed strength perspective or strength perspective, but they actually won't look at the possible negatives that their program has for their client, and consequently the client or the athlete will leave the coach with some glaringly obvious weaknesses that can really hurt them later on down the track. So we'll go into our first of our 10 points. So with periodization, you need to respect the three main reasons for a program change, and that's fatigue, accommodation, and logistics. Now, with fatigue, so assuming we're training with adequate volume and effort, accumulated fatigue in not just the nervous system, but various other systems, the body will necessitate a change at some point in time. Accommodation is basically the continual use of the same or a similar stimulus will result in diminished or discontinued positive adaptation. So basically with these first two, you can't just keep running the same program indefinitely. The first 2 points here will necessitate a change at some point. And the third point, logistics, there's never enough time, energy, or recovery ability to train everything that we need to at once. Therefore, we run into a problem when and where we choose to train certain qualities or certain angles or certain movements. Furthermore, there's certain base qualities that need to be in place before we can train further along down the track. So for example, without adequate eccentric strength, reactive strength qualities can never be trained to their full potential. So moving on from that, these 3 points basically necessitate either an undulating style of periodization over long term or a linear style over short-term training. Now, here we have an undulating example through a macro cycle of our strength training. So here we can see we have our intensity starting on the lowest end, it's set to 12, and we undulate down in repetitions or up in intensity, back up in reps, and back down in reps. This is what we refer to as undulating style of periodization. So the advantage is here that we have greater jumps in intensity and volume from phase to phase, means we can negate the majority of fatigue and accommodation. So basically we're moving away from a similar training style, therefore the fatigue that is accumulated with high repetition, high volume phases here can be negated with our second mesocycle, and then so on and so forth down the line. Other advantages here that time is spent away from previously trained strength qualities is minimal. So even though we've jumped from more hypertrophy style work here in the first mesocycle to something that's a little bit more strength oriented here, we only ever really spend one mesocycle away from our hypertrophy before going back, and vice versa with our strength. If we have a shorter period of time, the fatigue and accommodation don't really play as much of a part, and therefore we can use a linear style of periodization. So here we can see our average intensity will rise up linearly, and consequently the average repetition will drop for our strength work. So the advantage is here that we allow the greatest intensities to be trained at the back end of the scheme. So when we're peaking or when we're getting closer to the pre-season or the training, if we've got a team sport, we might be going back to training. Allows us to front up basically the higher intensity cycles closer to when we need to be better for our sport. Okay, the disadvantages though, the smaller changes in intensity and volume. So we're not going from 12 to 6s, we're going from 12s to 10s. So the small changes basically means fatigue and accommodation can creep in a little bit quicker because we're not moving very far away from previously trained systems or qualities. And then basically over a long period of time, if we continued with a linear system from 12s to 10s to 8s to 6 to 4 to 2, basically we've spent so much time away from our previously trained qualities up here that we actually lose quite a lot of what we've built up. So by the time we might get down to a mesocycle 5 and 6, basically we've lost the majority of the hypertrophy that we've built up in here because we haven't actually been back up in repetitions and back up in volumes. Therefore, in my opinion, it is not really ideal for long-term schemes. So if you've got an off-season or if you've got time with a client that's basically over 12 weeks long, okay, I would advise using an undulating style of periodization. If you've got a client for only a very short period in their off-season before they go back to their sport, I'd recommend using a linear style of periodization for their strength.
Dale, could you just quickly tell us what your mesocycles are there, just like in terms of weeks or duration?
Yeah, so generally these would be 3 weeks. So 4 3-week cycles would be 12 weeks.
Brilliant.
Just on that point, so basically in my opinion, fatigue and accommodation, basically they really dictate how long the mesocycles will be. So yeah, generally, in my opinion, 2 to 3 weeks is pretty much the length of the mesocycles I would run. Nearly 99% of the time. Any more than that, you're inviting fatigue and accommodation to really start impacting on your progress. Furthermore, if your mesocycles are longer, basically it means you're spending a longer time not training another quality or not training another movement. So it may be fine for what you're training currently, but you have to remember too, if your mesocycles are 4 weeks or even longer, that's 4 or 5 weeks that you're not training something else. So you have to always remember that. Point number 3, know your sport and know your athlete. So you have to look at your sporting requirements. So for example, the levels of maximal strength needed, and this goes beyond just what we what we see. Someone can bench press 100, 200, whatever. It's what they can eccentrically use, it's what they can isometrically use, and what they can produce concentrically. Furthermore to that, we have things like reactive, starting, and explosive strength requirements. How much speed is required in your sport as well, along with the movement angle. So we might have something that's very simplistic, like cycling or sprinting. Generally, when we're talking angular, we're moving in a straight line, versus something like AFL where we've got to move in all directions. Now, again, you have to compare that to the qualities that your athlete is showing. So basically, their levels of maximal strength, both eccentrically, isometrically, and concentrically. How well they are reactively, starting from dead stop, and the ability to accelerate a load that's already moving. Their speed versus their strength. So quite commonly, we have athletes that are very quick but not very strong, and then vice versa. How balanced they are structurally. So for example, we might have people that are incredibly strong at the bench press but have a very, very poor overhead press, which shows a glaring weakness there, and also their flexibility. So we can compare, for example, over here, we can compare the strength needs between a long jumper and a shot putter. So a long jumper doesn't need the absolute levels of maximal strength that the shot putter does, but what he or she as a long jumper really does need is high levels of eccentric and reactive or elastic strength. So they need a higher levels of eccentric strength to basically decelerate the movement before the jump, and then transfer that to a reactive change in motion, where the shot putter doesn't exactly need that reactive strength or high level of eccentric strength, because there's no huge eccentric loading. But for a shot putter, they need high levels of absolute, which means irrespective of body weight, absolute concentric and starting strength, because they're basically putting or they're accelerating the shot from the dead stop. There's no rebound there. So how to determine this? So for me, the relevant tests that I have, basically testing that strength of the agonist versus other agonists. So for example, you might test the difference between the incline and flat press, or the incline press, overhead press, flat press and dip, versus the antagonists. And basically what I use here, I use Charles Poliquin structural balance norms. Other things we can use the 1RM test to do is, for example, tell us whether we're more on the speed side or more on the strength side. So for example, if we can compare our 1RM power clean versus power snatch, we can tell which side of the force velocity curve that we're sitting on. Other tests that I use, so eccentric deficit tests, which is basically comparing a 1RM with a 40x0 tempo versus an 8-second eccentric only rep. So for example, there the norms range from 101% to 175%. That's comparing the eccentric to the regular rep. The explosive deficit test, which basically compares the reactive versus starting strength of the individual. So we compare a counter movement jump or throw versus the same test with a 3-second pause. So usually the norm for the alternative test is 0.8. So they'll produce 0.8 of the distance or the height with a 3-second pause compared to the counter movement. Other tests that we can use, for example, is an 85% rep test. So what this can do is basically tell us the neurological efficiency and fiber type makeup of our client, with an average being a 5. So effectively you take your 1RM and then 10 minutes later you rep out with 85% of that. And the amount of repetitions that you can get at 85% will basically tell you whether you're sitting a little bit more on the fast twitch end of the scale or the slow twitch end of the scale. So, for example, someone incredibly fast twitch may only be able to pump out 2 reps at 85% of their 1RM, or someone that's incredibly slow twitch might be able to pump out 8 or 10. And another thing I want to make clear is that the testing should always result in a change to the overall plan. So you should never really just test for the sake of testing. The results from your test should always tell you what you need to do. And then other relevant information that we need to look at, for example, is flexibility. So if you've got someone that's incredibly tight, that's going to affect the overall plan. Left to right discrepancies as well. So if you've got one side that's a lot stronger than the other, that's going to dictate the amount of barbell to dumbbell work that you can use, or the amount of bilateral to unilateral work. The levels of muscle mass, the body composition of the client. So if they're already at the top weight that they need to be, okay, well, that's going to change the amount of hypertrophy work or change the amount of volume in your periodization plan. And also the training age. So the greater the training age and the greater the ability from a strength perspective of your client will determine the amount of specialty methods that you can use. So point number 4, so especially in the off season, we're talking here, utilize both general prep and specific prep periods, along with potentially a power conversion phase. So the length of the GPP versus SSP is dictated by the structural balance and flexibility of the athlete, the levels of muscle mass, eccentric strength, and training age. So they're the main ones. So basically, the more unbalanced and smaller and weaker eccentrically the client is, the longer the GPP phase will be. Effectively, the stronger the athlete, the more balanced they are, the more time can be spent in the SPP. So generally here we can see the GPP, especially in my books, that's basically your base building. So we're trying to eradicate any weaknesses or discrepancies that we have, and basically building the base and the enhancement of the preceding qualities that we need to then build up in the SPP. And SPP in my books is for specialization. So from here, the intensities are higher, the volumes are lower, and we're basically increasing sport-specific strength qualities and also things like speed strength and strength speed. In conversion phases, this might come after the SPP potentially. This is where we have a reduction in the volume of maximal strength work, and then we're trying to convert the strength that we've developed here into something a little bit more power orientated. So for your GPP cycles, we're really trying to eliminate any structural balance issues. So there might be discrepancies between the strengths at various angles or the agonist to antagonist. That's where we have a high volume of unilateral and dumbbell work, the biggest range of motions. Here we will prioritize structural changes versus those on a more neurological scale. So basically the increase in the cross-sectional area of the muscle versus the neurological firing. Therefore we need a lower intensity, higher volume. And the physical qualities, we're trying to enhance our work capacity, strength endurance, and our base strength qualities, especially the eccentric strength. So that's quite important as we'll see going on. But we'll make this point very clear. The discrepancies and weaknesses that you have, they really need to be eradicated in the GPP. You can't go into a specialist SPP phase if you've still got big discrepancies and big weaknesses here. So for example, I like to have the overhead press of our athletes 71% of what their flat press will be. Well, if I've got a client that can flat bench press 100 kilos but can only overhead press 50, I can't go specializing into anything really in the SPP until I've eradicated that issue, and that goes all over the body. So here we can see an example 12-week macro cycle for our GPP. So for example, here we can see this is just for a lower body. We've got a high degree of unilateral work. Okay, big range of motions. We're working on in mesocycle 2 and 3, basically some longer eccentric components to our lifting. Pauses in the eccentric. Okay, there's nothing speed strength orientated. It's very general strength and trying to restore structural balance over anything else. Moving on into our SPP, so our priorities change slightly. So here we're looking for more neurological changes versus structural. So by this point in time, generally you would want to have increased muscle mass as much as you needed to or as much as you wanted to. Basically, we need to shift to some higher intensities and lower volumes. We need to have an enhancement of maximal strength and also start specializing in speed strength qualities that are specific to our sport. Also, we start looking at the angles, the grips, and the velocities of our sport and transfer that into our strength training program. Now, how much you specialize with all those above is basically depending on the athlete's training age, strength levels, and balance. So if you've got an athlete that's only in their second year of true strength training, well, you're not going to specialize in speed strength qualities. You're not going to get super specific with the angles and grips, basically because they're going to derive the biggest benefits just from becoming generally strong. But if you've got a client that's got a long history of strength training, they're strong everywhere, they're nicely balanced, they're strong eccentrically, then you can start chucking in some of the specialty strength speed methods a lot more. But as again, if in doubt, always just make the client balanced and eccentrically strong. That's going to give you the biggest benefit. Probably one of the mistakes I see with coaches, especially younger coaches, now they want to use all these fancy methods, this and that. If you can just use just good, proper strength training methods and schemes, using properly controlled eccentric tempos of 3 or 4 seconds as a general rule, it will set you in good stead. So here we're going to example 12-week upper body macro cycle for the SBP. This might be something that might be suitable for a football player. You can see here highlighted in orange. We're starting to use a little bit more specific in terms of our grip, so in terms of fat grip implements. For example, curls, chin-ups. For example, we've got some starting and explosive strength methods here for our incline press. So we've got an inertia press off the pin, so it's starting from a dead stop with a 2-second pause. And then here we've got an explosive strength method with that incline barbell press. Again, some fat grips, so it's only a little bit more specific. So for example, if the player had to push another player off, okay, that's a little bit more specific, using a somewhat open hand compared to a 28 millimeter barbell. And that's using an explosive strength method, which is 6 sets of 4 to 6 reps at 50% of 1 RM, but banded. So usually we're looking for those higher ends in terms of velocities. Now, sometimes it's applicable before the client goes back to their training camp or goes back to training with their team. We can have a conversion phase to convert the newfound strength into something a little bit more power orientated. So a couple of key points here is that you actually want to back off the maximal strength work during this time, and you only really have 2 to 4 weeks to do this, because any longer and you start losing the strength qualities that you've built up before. And you want to be using something around sort of 15 to 25% of the 1 RM. So for example, for the lower body, you might use a squat jump. For example, it might be 10 sets of 6, the 10x0 tempo using 15 to 20% of 1 RM. You might complete that twice per week. So it's really minimal in terms of training volume, but we're placing the client right in that power part of the force velocity curve. Now, it's not quite as quick as what our pliers or speed work is, but it's basically that stepping stone between our maximal strength and our speed work. Now, as I said, these specialty methods, they can be put in certain parts of the periodization scheme. Though again, I will advise, just if in doubt, just use regular strength training methods and just do it properly. But basically, we have specialty strength methods like accentuated eccentrics. Now, when I talk about eccentrics, this can be as simple as just slowing down the eccentric component of our regular lifting. So anything over, or in my book, anything over a 4-second eccentric could be classified as an accentuated eccentric rep. So we can have both sub-maximal, in which case it's less than what your 1 RM is, or we can have a super maximal, which is just the eccentric only portion of the lift. And usually this would be placed in the GPP at least a minimum of 6 weeks away from the peak of that phase. Isometrics, so these can be yielding or overcoming isometrics. So yielding basically where you're just sort of yielding to the load. So that these will just be pauses or just holding a weight statically, or they can be overcoming isometrics, in which case you're pushing or pulling against a movable object. These again will be in the GPP. In our speed strength or strength to speed methods, again, the eccentric qualities must be in place before we start training these. But we have reactive strength, which is our ability to reverse a movement, our starting strength, which is the ability to accelerate a load from a dead stop, and our explosive strength, which is the ability to accelerate a load which is already moving. These will generally be in place in the SPP, and they're usually closer to the end. So things like our reactive strength, these are definitely one of the last methods to use, because on the intensity scale they're high. Things like specialty grip implements, so fat grips, or some of the other grip implements that are there in the market. Okay, you can either use them in the main movements like chin-ups or presses in the intensity phases, so those phases with the highest levels of intensity and lowest reps, or you can use them in the minor movements, things like the curls, for example, in your hypertrophy work during the accumulation phases, so the phases which were of higher volumes and lower intensity. Now, peaking for major competition, so again, depending on when and where and how you have the client, and how much strength work you're doing around that time, so you can putting a peaking or a tapering component to your periodization scheme. This can only really be done sort of 1 to 3 times per year. Any more than that, and you just lose far too many qualities that you've built up. You can't be peaking 40 times a year. You have to basically pick and choose where your priorities are. So the couple of main rules. So the more the requirements of maximal strength in the sport. Sorry, I've got that ran the wrong way. But the more the requirements of maximal strength, the further up you continue the weight training. So as an example here, marathon running doesn't have a huge maximal strength component, so you drop it earlier. Things like grappling, for example, have a much greater need for maximal strength, so that you may continue doing your weight training up until the day before. As a rule, stronger athletes in the more neurological demanding sports can start their tapering further out. So, for example, your top powerlifters might have a 21-day taper. If you're just a beginner, you might only have 3 or 4 days. And also, generally, tapers will always be preceded by a higher volume of higher intensity. So you have to have something to taper off. You can't just have a low volume of work and then just drop that down to next to nothing. You actually have to have a fairly fatiguing phase before that. But just as a general rule, your peaking and tapering phase in terms of strength training should really never be more than 10 days. When I was dealing with powerlifters, they were pretty handy, up towards the Australian sort of national level. Some of them were double bodyweight squats, triple bodyweight deadlifts. We never went any more than 10 days in terms of peaks and tapers. Now, last point for your in-season or the pre-competitive phase for your weight training. So generally, the general consensus is 2 to 3 weight training sessions per week, and usually there's a whole body. In season, the priorities are always retentions of muscle mass and maximal strength, as well as offsetting the demands of the sport. So, for example, football, you generally never enter high degrees of knee flexion, for example. So we have to offset all the work, all the running, everything else that's been done in those partial range of motions. One big tip: usually in season you don't need to train for power, or you will not want to train for power in the gym. The reason being that training for power in the gym will compete for recovery with the sports form. So, for example, if you're training a basketballer, the in-season training doesn't need to be power-based because they're doing so many jumps already on the court. So that's my top tip there, is that you basically don't need to train for power, because that's the main quality that's being trained usually in season. Normally we just want to keep maximal strength and keep hypertrophy. Train for hypertrophy as soon as possible after the competition, so the actual hypertrophy work can act as active recovery. This can be done the day after competitions, and usually a second or third session will be a little bit higher in intensity, and usually you want at least 2 to 3 days between that and competitions. So we'll give an example on the next page. For example, day 1, if we're just training 2 days per week in season, this could be appropriate for a footballer. So day 1 might be more concentrating on retaining structural balance and hypertrophy. You see we've got more unilateral and dumbbell work. And that second day can be more of a neurological stimulus, and this can be kept 48 to 72 hours before the competition. So for recap, point 1, respect the 3 main factors of periodization, so fatigue, accommodation and logistics. Those 3 all have to be taken into account with the lengths of your mesocycles and what you put in them. My tip, use undulating periodization, so up and down in volumes for long term, so any more than 12 weeks you've got the client for, and a linear style if you've only got them for a short time, so 12 weeks and less. 2, both know the athlete and their sporting needs. Utilize GPP and SPP periods along with conversion phases where applicable. In the GPP, build your base and eliminate weaknesses. In the SPP, specialize and develop those maximal strength qualities. And then in the conversion phase, convert the strength you have to higher velocity power. Utilize the proper timing of the specialty methods, so more eccentrically based methods in the GPP, more speed strength methods in the SPP. Reduce your volume of strength training for your peak. And in season, your priority is retention of maximal strength and hypertrophy. So this is normally about an 8-hour lecture when I give this both internally and then externally to students. So we're obviously glossing over this pretty quickly, but I hope using these points people can periodize a little bit more effectively in the future and possibly be a little bit less confused. So thanks for having me.
I was just about to elaborate on that point here and say, like, obviously we could talk about periodization for a lot longer than today, but I love this recap to emphasize what you've discussed today and the key elements. And I could ask a lot of questions, but I'm just going to touch base back on 2 things. The first one, again, just recap why you like 2 and 3 week mesocycles again, just with your programming, just to get people to understand that, because I think a lot of people get stuck on the 4-week model too often. I'm someone who pushes hard for 3-week blocks or mesocycles. So if you could just elaborate on that again, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think from a fatigue and accommodation perspective, I think 4 weeks is too long. So basically, if you're training hard, both either with high volumes or with high intensities, 4 weeks just basically is far too long to be training with the same program. So I think we'll definitely find towards week 3 and 4, you'll find that the positive adaptations slow down. Again, this is dependent on you training hard with adequate volume. So if you're only training strength training once per week or twice per week, or you could possibly train for 6 weeks in a row and you're not going to see progress slow down. It's just you've got a pretty slow rate of progress. But if you're training strength training in the off season 4 times per week, by the 3rd week, assuming you're doing enough volume of the right exercises, you're not fucking around in the gym, the big compound movements, training hard. Basically, by the third week, you really need to change because progress is slowing down just because of fatigue and accommodation. And then 2, obviously, the longer your mesocycles, that's less time you've got to be spending on other things. So if you've got 4-week mesocycles, or if you've only got 12-week off season, that's only 3 changes you've really got with your program. So sometimes just backing off the length of the mesocycle will allow you to train other qualities, and then you can also come back to those previously trained qualities a little bit quicker.
Yeah, love that. And also just want to touch base on your presentation in general here today to emphasize that the key part of this presentation, as you can see from what Dale's shown us, is to do with the fact that he's really focusing in on strength development across these phases and the programmings that he's using here. So obviously, if you want to talk about introducing all other elements of developing athletes for their sport and their technical sessions and their speed agility, that's where periodization goes a lot greater. So get what you can get done well and improve upon with your programming when it comes back to strength training. There is a lot of amazing takeaways from today's presentation, so thank you very much for that, Dale.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. And now we'll move over to the last man of the day. Lucky last. Saved him for last because I think this one's going to really sort of get people thinking outside the square of what physical performance is and optimizing physical performance, especially in males, because when we think about males and what really separates us and what we're capable of achieving is really comes down to this hormone that we have running through our bodies, which enables us to do what we can do. So Lucas is Australia's leading biohacker. He's really pushing hard for men's health and performance, and he's got some amazing resources on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram detailing everything you ever wanted to know about why you try to biohack. Biohacking is the 1% stuff, but it's now probably pushing towards even 10% now, because it used to be sort of seen as just like fringe, but now we're seeing that this actually has huge benefits to optimizing performance. So Lucas, if you'd like to take over, I would love to hear what you've got to talk to us about today on the importance of testosterone in males.
Yeah, man. Well, I just wanted to, you guys can hear me clearly?
Yep.
We'll check on that. Cool. I've prepared a presentation, Mike. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you share your screen and you'll take over and it will come straight up.
All right. Can you guys see that clearly?
Yep. Perfect. Lovely.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, firstly, a little bit of an intro. Yep. So I've just finished off my naturopathy degree. I'm based here in Melbourne as well. And really my mission is to, deliver really cutting edge health information that most people struggle to find on Google. Recently started a YouTube channel and have a comprehensive Instagram, which goes through a range of really unique biohacks. But obviously, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to Mike for hosting this event. Just hats off to you. I know right now is a very tough time for most PTs and health practitioners. I can understand the struggles, and right now, man, I'm doing the same thing, literally just staying at home, creating content, filming. I feel like I'm literally a slave to YouTube at the moment. So ultimately today's presentation is all around testosterone optimization. And the reason I'm very passionate about this subject is because there are too many men out there that are struggling with low testosterone, and it's having such a dramatic effect on their quality of life. And what really disappoints me is the fact that, let's say, for example, a guy goes into, the doctor's clinic and complains of maybe low mood or feeling flat or not having much energy, things like that. And oftentimes the first, point of call will be to prescribe an antidepressant, an SSRI. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, testosterone is actually never considered, and they never actually test a man's testosterone level. And so that really is something that needs to change. And what I'm here to talk to you guys about is, why testosterone optimization is so crucial for all men, regardless of if they're PTs or athletes, because really what I'm about to show you is how broad spectrum and pleiotropic the effects of testosterone are in the body. So firstly, let's have a look at why low testosterone is such a big deal. So testosterone has a huge influence of in a man's brain, and specifically it can govern and really affect a man's level of confidence. Now, the thing about this is that a lot of people also think that, it must just be, testosterone is the only hormone that governs confidence, when really it's actually testosterone's metabolites. It's testosterone's metabolite, DHT, which is produced in quite large amounts in the brain, that gives a man that feeling of confidence it can significantly affect a man's level of motivation. And that's because DHT can actually regulate, and not many people know this, but DHT can actually increase GABA in the brain. Now, GABA is the neurotransmitter that has an anxiolytic action, so it reduces anxiety. And it's actually one of the neurotransmitters that alcohol increases. So instead, we've got a neurohormone DHT, which can increase GABA versus something like alcohol, which actually over time will deplete and lower GABA. So we can see that testosterone affects motivation. It can affect a man's resilience. So crazy research showing that testosterone can make a man tolerate extremely uncomfortable environments. Like, it makes a man more capable of withstanding extremely stressful stimuli. It makes a man not want to give up, and it actually helps a man sort of chase his goals. And if you think about it from like an evolutionary point of view, testosterone's all about building and chasing after their goal, or building an empire and producing for the world, instead of being in that learned helplessness state where men feel like they have no desire or ability to produce and add value to the world. So that's a really key point to consider. And then obviously the energy side of things. I mean, there is no way a man can feel good with low testosterone from an energy perspective. I mean, from the guys that have consulted, unfortunately they've had issues with low testosterone, and their energy levels are really, really poor. So we can see it's having a dramatic effect there. So I wanted to quickly share, what I was able to do, because I was really obsessed with optimizing testosterone. I was very, passionate from, when I was probably 16 or 17. I was really interested in improving my hormones. And so I went on this, crazy mission to try and max out my testosterone naturally. And I was able to do that. You can see my blood test result here. My total testosterone was sitting at 34.3, which is about 988 nanograms per deciliter, so just short of 1,000. And what's crazy, you can see that reference range, 5.7 to 26.1. You could be literally sitting at, let's say you're a 25-year-old male and you're sitting at maybe 10 or 11. The doctor is unlikely to make any significant suggestions unless it's severe. So unless your value is either too high or too low. So in my case, it was pretty funny. The doctor questioned whether I'd been using TRT or taking testosterone, but really it was the combination of icing my balls, plus eating organ meats, plus using a range of supplements that Mike also knows about. And training, doing squats and deadlifts twice a week, things like that, were all influencing my testosterone levels.
I'm sure these people comment to me after. What supplements are?
Yeah, you can comment, Mike, if you have a question.
Nah, sorry. All good. I'll wait till the end.
Yeah, all good. The other point I wanted to mention is that I was fortunate enough to gain recognition from a leader in this space. Hopefully some of you listening in will know Ben Greenfield. He's probably one of the biggest biohackers in the world, most well known, probably one of the most successful as well. And I was very fortunate and privileged to have featured on his podcast, where I spoke about some of the things associated with testosterone. So let's have a look at how testosterone is produced. So many people don't realize that it's really mediated and governed by the brain. So we can see there the hypothalamus. There's a range of neurotransmitters that can actually influence that GnRH, which is gonadotrophin releasing hormone. That then goes to a different part of the brain known as the anterior pituitary gland. And what people don't realize is that, we talk about neurotransmitters, we talk about serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, GABA, I spoke about before. A lot of people don't realize that serotonin, you can see there the hypothalamus, and then it releases GnRH. Serotonin actually dampens and reduces GnRH. So you can see here, we're starting to see the links that those men that have high serotonin, generally speaking, have low testosterone. And that goes against goes against what most, medical doctors will say. You need high serotonin. You hear the media say, oh yeah, serotonin is so good. It's, very helpful for your well-being. But you can see here that serotonin can directly affect that GnRH. And we can stimulate that GnRH by using or increasing dopamine. So there's a strong correlation between high dopamine and high testosterone. So that's just a bit of a summary there. You can see the diagram down. So anterior pituitary gland releases both luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. That then goes to the testes, and then the testes create testosterone. So this point is crucial to understand. You're not the man your father was. Unfortunately, we are seeing this, in my opinion, is the real epidemic. We are seeing a population-wide decline in testosterone, and it is scary to really look at this graph, because in 33 years from now, and I spoke to Jay Campbell about this, he's like the author of the TOT Bible, said that all men in the Western world will be infertile in 33 years from now, which is a scary stat. Crazy just to think about that. And there's many causes of this decline, which I'll quickly touch on. So here are some, these are the key testosterone blockers that men need to be avoiding. So we have drinking from plastic bottles. Guys, if you're listening in, you're still using a Mount Franklin or a plastic bottle, I really encourage you to switch over to a glass bottle or a aluminium water bottle, because these plastic bottles can leach out xenoestrogens, even if they are BPA free. So you might see bottles that say, this bottle is BPA free. Unfortunately, they might use a different plastic like BPB. They'll just use a different type of plastic. Then we have canola oil. You'll see canola oil in many products that can directly damage the testes. We have soy food, tofu, any soy-based foods. I don't care what people say about, it doesn't have any effect on total testosterone output. If we're talking from a performance perspective, there is no way soy food has a positive effect on sports performance. And that's because soy foods can lower DHT. And I spoke to you briefly about how important DHT is. So really, guys, like men that eat soy foods or soy-based products, generally speaking, don't feel the benefits of having high testosterone. You can see toothpastes rich in fluoride. They can affect the pineal gland. That can affect melatonin release and then indirectly affect testosterone. Flax seeds and linseed seeds I'm not a fan of, and they've been shown to increase sex hormone binding globulin and lower testosterone. And then we have specific deodorants. So a lot of those deodorants that contain crazy, research chemicals and things like that, they can affect testosterone production. So we can see here some of the signs of low testosterone: depression, lack of focus, constant fatigue, man boobs or gyno, abdominal fat, decreased muscle mass, low libido and erection problems, and decreased athletic performance. Whereas on the contrary, a guy or a man with high testosterone has, generally speaking, an elevated mood. They feel confident. They back themselves. They chase the thing is, like, testosterone, I said before, helps a man build an empire. We want to use that. There's one thing to, like, promote the bad way of looking at it is we want to increase testosterone to become like a, typical alpha male that's destructive to the environment. Instead, we want to use that high testosterone to build an empire and add value and be a contribution to society. That's what I strongly stand for. So we can see the longevity benefits of high testosterone. Having low testosterone causes an increased risk of all-cause mortality. Increases the risk of many metabolic diseases such as diabetes and even metabolic syndrome as well. Here are some of the mental health benefits of high testosterone. We get, improvements in motivation, better resilience, increased confidence, and less depression. So from a testosterone boosting perspective, obviously there are many components here, but these are like my top 5. So we have, from a dietary perspective and nutrition perspective, I could spend probably 2 hours talking about a range of nutrition interventions, but generally speaking, a high saturated fat, yes, you heard me correctly, a high saturated fat diet is beneficial for testosterone output, obviously accompanied with sufficient amount of carbohydrates. I'm someone who's not against carbohydrates. In fact, I think, most athletes should be having 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrates per day if they're trying to train for performance and hormone output. Then from the other biohacks, we have icing of the testes, which I'll explore soon, sleep, supplements, and exercise. So I want to start with a testosterone boosting pepper. You can choose to either use regular white pepper or you can use something called Grains of Paradise. This is a quick little, nutrition hack that you can implement pretty much straight away. So Grains of Paradise is known as Aphromomum melibuta. It's actually native to North and West Africa. And it's actually from the same spice family as ginger. So we know that ginger by itself has beneficial effects on testosterone, and so does this particular type of pepper. And in terms of like the mechanism of action, it increases cholesterol in the testes, it inhibits PDE5, and it also may have androgenic compounds present. And some of the benefits are increases erection strength. Many guys have noted that. Enhances testosterone production, decreases your reload time, enhances blood flow. And so in terms of a dosage, you can use it as just a seasoning for your main dishes, or you can have about 2 to 5 of the seeds per day. You can chew them. They've got obviously a very strong flavor, but they can actually be quite mentally refreshing and awakening as well. So that's a cool little nutrition hack there. And then next we have mouth taping for morning wood. I did a YouTube video on this. I expand upon this in my testosterone program. So basically looking at how nitric oxide is actually made in the nose or the nasal cavity. And by shutting off the mouth when we breathe, we're forced to breathe through our nose like we're designed to. And that increases nitric oxide, which improves blood flow, vasodilation. You guys know all the benefits surrounding exercise performance. Better blood flow equals better nutrient delivery equals better nutrient uptake. So yeah, mouth taping is definitely something that a lot of men have seen benefits from as well. So that's pretty much it. Obviously, that's just like a bit of a snippet. I'm conscious of the time. Open to questions. Happy to have a chat. Mike, anyone else want to check in.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure it's something I've already been hit up by a few people about what supplements. Why did you hold out on us? So thanks for dropping me in on that. But obviously, key thing there is like when we're thinking about athletes and performance is that it's not just our training, it's not our periodization, it's not our injury resilience. It's actually like it's so much more. And I guess this highlights like athletes that we're trying to help perform at their best. We need to look and work with specialist people to help us understand internally what's going on with the athlete that might be affecting what they produce when it comes to our training. So I think the more we can look into blood analysis, internal analysis of what's going on in terms of physiology, we can start to deeper understand how we can optimize potential performance of our male athletes, and it's not something we should shy away from. And obviously it is a specialist field, and something that we're not fully aware of at this stage, but I really wanted to just bring that to light, because a lot of us are looking at it from the performance mindset of athletes and how we can look into stuff like this. So in terms of that, Lucas, is your recommendation like obviously linking up and working with specialist naturopaths who have a better understanding, or is there about this stuff in terms of like reading bloods and then prescribing nutrition interventions to maximize your hormones?
Yeah, I think like a good place to start would be to obviously first of all devour all of my free resources in this realm, because I've posted a lot of good resources there. And then if people want to learn more and they want to take it to the next level, they want to either get some blood work assessed, then reach out. They can either work directly with me or with a qualified naturopath as well. I mean there's a lot of other resources. I've also designed a full testosterone optimization program, which goes through like literally from start to finish, diet, supplementation, when to train, how to train, all to maximize testosterone. So, because I just had so many guys messaging me saying, how did you get your testosterone so high? And then obviously just put it together in a program, and people can access that. Send me an email if they want to dive deeper into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And on that note, everyone, I think we will finish up, and I just want to say a huge thanks again to our presenters, because they've given up their time, their knowledge, and giving back to our industry, which you can't fault. In times like this, when everything seems to be pointing against us, and it's opportunities like this that sort of galvanize people just want to keep pushing forward in our industry. And I don't think I could have asked for a better 5 presentations. We covered a lot of amazing topics today and a lot of amazing knowledge. So I'm sure you're at home, and if you would join me in thanking our presenters and today. And that's a wrap, folks. Strive for greatness, and we'll see you all again soon. Phew! Finished. All right.